Thank you so much for taking the time from your very busy schedules. I know this is a really very, very hectic time of the year. So I'm just going to jump right in here. And as you know, we had a regular session. Regular session is when anything can happen. Let's see, I'm going to try to hide my panel here so that I can actually see my slides too. So in the regular session took place from January 12th to May 31st. In the regular session, anybody can introduce legislation, and if it makes it through the House and Senate and the governor supports it or takes no action on it, it takes effect. We've had a pretty good session, and that's mostly what I'm going to be focusing on today is the 87th regular session and what happened there. We had a first special session in July that ran from July 8th through August 6th. As you know, not very much happened because most of the Democrats hightailed it up to Washington, D.C. and a concern about the election reform bill. Then we had a second special session, August 7th through September 5th, and they came back and sort of came back towards the end, got a little bit more done, and now we're anticipating the start of the third special session starting next week. Only the items, when you get into a special session, only the items that the governor has added to the special session can be considered. Everybody can file a lot of bills, but only those that the governor has designated on his agenda can be enacted. And there are a couple of items that we really should be paying attention to in this session, in the third special session. One is redistricting, because it's very important to determine who is going to represent you. The other is allocation of the federal emergency relief dollars that are coming to Texas. The legislature really did not want the governor on his own to make those decisions, or this body called the Legislative Budget Board. So that's going to be an interesting discussion.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Jan.
Yes.
I have some people in the chat saying they can barely hear. I hear you very well. So there's a few folks in the chat that are saying they cannot hear anything.
Oh.
Okay.
I'm going to unmute.
Can hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Can the rest of the group hear? Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. My mic, it might have gotten dislodged. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Interrupt me anytime that happens. Okay, so basically, in a nutshell, we're in a third special session, and there are a couple of items that are of interest to us, but not necessarily specific to counseling. For the Texas Counseling Association, every bill that gets filed, we measure it up against these three standards. Does it increase access to professional counselors? Does it prioritize funding for mental health and education? Does it promote equity, inclusion, dignity, and justice for all Texans? Thousands of bills are filed in a regular session, and as I said, more bills can be filed in a special session, but we only pay attention to the bills that the governor has added to his call. And this is what we measure all those bills against. And if it hits any of these points, we'll track it. And if it doesn't, we usually don't pay any attention to it because it's just too much to do. I also want to issue a quick disclaimer here that this presentation is intended only as an overview and a summary of several key bills that we've identified that may impact the work of professional school counselors. It's not a complete index. There may be others. A lot of things happened during this session where a bill that wasn't moving or moved through one house, not through the other, might get tagged to another bill. So we still identify those as we go through and continue to review legislation that was enacted. But this is not a complete index. If you want to, the best source to read complete bill texts and access legislation considered during all of the legislative sessions is by going to www www.capital.texas.gov. That's a good resource too, because if you want to look at some of the background, find out who supported, who opposed, what legislative analysis has been done, that's a good resource for that too. So I am pleased to say that during this session, we had some amazing, amazing accomplishments. And of course, the biggest one is Senate Bill 179. I've been working with TCA since 2003, and starting in 2005, we started working on this legislation simply to allow you to spend the majority of your time directly working with school children, implementing the comprehensive school counseling program. And we finally got it enacted this session. I'm going to talk a bunch more about that in a minute. Senate Bill 168 is another important bill because it redesigned active shooter drills. And I'm going to talk about that one. Senate Bill 123 added social emotional learning to the character education TEKS. Again, I think that's going to be very, very helpful. HB 5 funds broadband development and expands the Governor's Broadband Development Council. That is especially helpful for those of you who are working in internet deserts, so to speak. It's really a goal to try to expand access to the internet for all of our, especially for all of our students. As you know, both the pandemic and of course Uri also exposed so many weaknesses that we have in internet access. And House Bill 1525, which I'm also going to talk about a little bit later, we consider this a big success. One of our important strategic goals was to ensure that the state did not supplant state dollars for public education with federal dollars. Oftentimes, when the state gets into some financial jams and they have new money that comes into the state, they will take the general revenue funds that they've allocated for a certain agency or program like public education, and they'll move those to other programs that are facing shortfalls, like maybe Medicaid, stuff like that, or internet development, infrastructure development, and they'll use the federal dollars. Well, we wanted the federal dollars to be on top of the state dollars, and 1525 accomplished that. And we worked in coalition. We work with a lot of coalitions, but we work with education groups to support that. So we claim that as a victory as well. Of course, there were challenges, things that were not so good. Senate Bill 1267 changes the continuing education rules for all educators, not just for school counselors, but we're very concerned about what it does for school two continuing education requirements for school counselors and the timeline of implementation. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later as well. House Bill 3979, as you know, pretty hot topic bill regarding discussion of civics content and classroom discussions. There was another piece that was passed in the special session, in the last special session, and we're in the process of going through to see what the impact of that will be as well. We add this as a challenge here because we know that school counselors often are called upon as part of responsive services to go into classrooms when certain events take place. And those events may be based on activities that and require you to have discussions about historical events regarding, I would say specifically what we're looking at here is a lot of racial issues, right? So if there's a shooting, if there's a big demonstration, and so we're just a little concerned to make sure that there's no adverse impact on school counselors here. I'm not going to go into much detail on this. Other than that, I would strongly encourage you to pay attention to the policies that your district has adopted in relation to House Bill 3979 when you prepare for how you are going into classrooms for classroom guidance or for responsive services around some of those hot topics. And then House Bill 3379 modifies the standards for reporting of child abuse and neglect. I would say keep doing what you're doing, but they've included some language that makes it a little fuzzy. So what's next? I think it's important, before I actually get into the weeds of what was included in each of the bills that were passed, to also walk you through the rulemaking process a little bit. Because what I like to say is that a bill by itself is just like a skeleton, right? It really can't move. It really can't do very much. What you need in order for that bill to have some muscle and to have some strong muscles and to get those ligaments and tendons working so that it can move around and actually have an impact is a bill with rules. You have to have rules. So in the public education sector, there are 4 entities that are responsible for developing the rules that impact that affect implementation of the legislation and that actually affect your work as it relates to the various statutes. So the first body I'm going to mention here pretty briefly is the State Board for Educator Certification. This body is appointed by the governor. It's pretty big. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact number of members on it, but it includes representatives from TEA, from the coordinating board, from charter schools. It also has the voting members are people who are educators in the state. So they're all appointed by the governor. Great news is that Benna Glasscock, who is the director of guidance, I'm not sure that's her title, but that's certainly her role at Hereford ISD up near Amarillo, was just appointed to be the school counselor representative. And it's very exciting for us because Benna is a former she's a past president of the Texas School Counselor Association and a member of TCA and a member of the TASCA and a member of the Texas Association for Counselor Education and Supervision. So her heart is really with us, right? And it's always important to have a really well experienced school counselor in that position because we only have one person there and a voice. For the last 7 years, we had Rohanna Sykes there. Rohanna resigned to take a position with the Texas Education Agency in the mental health unit over there. So State Board for Educator Certification adopts a number of rules that impact your work. They establish the standards for licensure, the standards for your performance, and so forth. So that's a very important body. TCA has a volunteer liaison who monitors that along with me. Her name is Megan Guidry. She is currently working in Bernie ISD, originally came to us from Upper East Texas. Then we have the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education is elected. So that's a group that you really should pay attention to. You should know who your representative on the State Board of Education is and make sure that they understand what you're doing and what your work is. That person is someone that we're having special events on your campus. When you're doing programs, you should really reach out to include them. When you have victories, when you win your CREST awards, always let that person know so that they can, again, become an ally for you when the state board has to make decisions. Then we have the education commissioners. Michael Morath is the commissioner of public education, and he is appointed by the governor and serves at the will of the governor. He's been in there he's got a fairly long tenure, which we haven't seen historically for a while. He also, in many pieces of legislation, he is directed, the Office of the Education Commissioner is directed to adopt rules. The higher education at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, that commissioner is Harrison Keller, and he is actually selected by the Higher Education Coordinating Board. The Higher Education Coordinating Board is appointed by the governor. And they adopt rules, but the rules that are most likely to impact school counselors coming from the coordinating board relate to financial aid programs and things like that. I believe some of the Texas OnCourse just moved over to the coordinating board, and we're seeing some CTE stuff heading over there. So that's another agency that we watch. And then last, but certainly not least, most important to you are the school boards. Know who your school board members are, know what their positions are, and know what their knowledge is, which is probably nominal, on what it is that you do and what it is that you're assigned to do in statute. The school boards will actually be the bodies that will be adopting the policies that are required by Senate Bill 179 to impact the amount of time you get to spend with students. So the rulemaking process, we have the great news is that when you go through the rulemaking process, there are multiple opportunities for you as a stakeholder to have a voice and to express your opinion. TCA is very much involved with the rulemaking process for SBAC, for the commissioner. We also do the same thing for those of you who are LPCs with the Texas State Board of Examiners of Professional Counselors and the Behavioral Health Executive Council. A very important part of our advocacy work is paying attention to these rules. And you can see where I've highlighted in red on this slide, those are the different opportunities that as stakeholders, we can give input and guidance on what the impact of these rules will be. In fact, TCA recently submitted some we very informally submitted rules in this first box here to TEA staff specifically regarding some changes in the protocol for disciplinary action regarding to notice of termination of contracts. And then again, once the staff, so here the staff does that, it goes over to there's a discussion by the State Board for Educator Certification. At those meetings, you have an opportunity to have to stand up and give public testimony. It's published in the Texas Register for a minimum of 30 days. Again, we submit comments on our position during that public input process. SBEC then they adopt the rule. Either they adopt the rule, if they don't adopt the rule, it goes back and starts again. But if they adopt the rule, then SBEC rules have to go to the State Board of Education for review. Published again in the Register. Again, we have more meetings for stakeholder input. The SBOE, the State Board of Education, can do two things with rules that come to them from SBEC. They can either send it back to SBEC, and in which case the rule is not adopted. We saw that happen a couple of years ago when there was a disagreement about what the GPA to get admitted to an educator prep program needed to be. SBEC had it a little bit lower than SBOE wanted it to be, so they sent it back. In the end, it went to the legislature, and the legislature went with the SBEC recommendations. In any event, if the State Board of Education takes no action, and that is what happened when SBEC proposed changes to the certification standards for school counselors. Those rules went before the State Board of Education. Very dynamic discussion there, but in the end we prevailed. The State Board of Education took no action. The rules were adopted. Then after those rules were adopted, if they often will go and impact district policy, and you should start to see discussion of those at your school board meetings. When you go through the commissioners process, we don't have quite as many opportunities for input as we do with the publicly appointed process. Generally, the bill becomes a law, the staff will review it. Sometimes they invite us to give input, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they will just draft the rules will get published in the Register, and that may be our only time for input. If the rule is postponed, which is what we saw happen, I want to say in the last year or so regarding some of the requirements around implementation of the school safety standards set forth in Senate Bill 11. If the rule is, so sometimes the rule is postponed. If the rule is adopted, then again, the school district policy adoption process begins, and then you'll see it come out in district policy. If the rule is postponed, then the process begins all over again, and sometimes you never see that rule reappear. So now I'm going to jump into Senate Bill 179, and I like to refer to this bill as Time with Students. During testimony, both Elisa Pritchard, who is the immediate past president of the Texas School Counselor Association, and I testified on this bill both before the Senate Education Committee and the House Public Education Committee. We walked the halls. I also started to referring to this bill as Good Conversations Bill, because that's what's going to have to happen for Senate Bill 179 to really take effect. So the effective date of this bill is September 1st, 2021. The bills have different effective dates, and all that means is that's the date when it technically hits the books. All right, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the implementation bit time, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that's when the clock starts ticking. Because again, as I said, many times legislation has to go through a rulemaking process, and that adds to the implementation timeline. Districts were directed to, however, for this bill, districts were directed to implement it in this school year with some caveats. there is language in here that I'll get to in a second that will impact what your contract with the district will look like. The legislature knew, and we knew, that most contracts are signed in the spring or over the summer. And we didn't want to impose on all school districts the craziness, right? Because some of our opponents were saying this was going to create great upheaval and require new and unique language and services with school counselors. So we wanted to avoid that. So the contract, it really only technically impacts contracts that are signed after September 1, 2021. So your contract might not reflect the good language that this requires for this year, but next year it will have to. Regarding rules, the only, other than directing districts to adopt a policy on this, the only rule requirement that the commissioner has is to establish monitoring timelines for their desk reviews as to whether or not the schools, the districts have adopted these policies. And he was not given any timeline for the adoption of those rules. So I don't expect that to happen very soon, because we're not expecting policies to get over to TEA until maybe the end of this year. So Senate Bill 179 requires that every school board shall, very important word in legislation, shall adopt a policy to require 80% of a school counselor's time to be spent on delivering the 4 components of a school counseling program developed under Section 33005 of the Texas Education Code. I want to be clear, that is the Texas model for comprehensive school counseling programs. It's not the ASCA model. It is not your counselor educator's favorite program for how to deliver school counseling programs. It's the Texas model. Administering assessment instruments is not time spent on counseling, but interpreting the data is. Now, regarding the employment contracts, your contracts can't conflict with the 80% policy, and they cannot contain provisions that allow a superintendent or principal to require that you perform duties not related to a counseling function. Those policies must be maintained in district offices and available on request to employees, parents, and the public. We did have to allow a carve out, however, because in order to get some of our rural legislators who represent rural and very small school districts. So if a campus or a district can establish that their staffing needs simply won't allow a counselor to spend 80% of their time, and we do know that we have lots of districts where you have maybe one counselor, and you have, the AP is also driving the school bus, and everybody's doing everything. But in those cases, they still have to adopt a policy. They have to state why the 80% standard can't be met. They have to list the duties that you're supposed to perform outside the counseling program. And they have to set the percentage of time that school counselors will be required to spend on components of the counseling programs. So how are you going to implement Senate Bill 179? Lots of people are very, very, very concerned about this. Your very first step is to engage your administrator, right? To sit down and have a conversation, to let him or her know you're not enemies, you're partners in this program. You need to do work time studies. Using the 4 components of the comprehensive school counseling program, look at where and how you spend your time. We are of a pretty clear thought that, in point of fact, fair share duties, a lot of your fair share duties are going to fall under, which is how we describe non-counseling duties. Fair share duties are the things that everybody's got to kick in for, and that fall outside the technical scope of your job description. But we think a lot of your fair share duties or non-counseling duties will actually fall underneath system support, which is why it's important to do your work time study. I'm just going to give a little plug. On September 21st, from noon to 1 o'clock, TASCA is holding a training program on how to collect your data and how to use your data to tell your story. So if you are able to attend that, it's free for anyone. You don't have to be a member of TCA or TASCA to attend. I would encourage you to look into that so that you can get some guidance on how to do that. Build partnerships. Build your partnerships with your entire campus. Every time you go to a faculty meeting or a district meeting, Make sure that you have a positive story to tell about how your work helps students succeed and how your work helps save time. If you can get into the classroom, if you can do some individual planning, if you can do some individual responsive services with some kids, if you have the time to go in and do that, you will, research has shown, you're going to reduce disciplinary referrals, you're going to increase academic performance. When you reduce disciplinary referrals, what do? You save AP time. So that's a great thing to do. And create a reasonable timeline, right? Think about this. It took us since 2005, that's a lot of years, to get this bill passed. So you're not going to get it implemented immediately. Be patient. Define your counseling duties. Be very, very clear and specific. And your counseling duties should be driven by the mission and the goals and the strategic plan of your campus. It will be different for each and every one of you. Some counselors want to go into art meetings because they want to be part of the discussion because they figure they're going to be dealing with those kids later. On other campuses, not so much. So it can be very, very unique to your campus and what your needs are. Share model policies. If you are working on a campus, and there are so many districts across Texas right now that are actually going above and beyond this 80% ratio. If you are working in a district or you're working on a campus where your policies are really supporting you, focusing your work on counseling duties, share them. And then be patient. Be very, very patient. So I will take questions here at the end. I'm trying to monitor my time here and jump through everything because I have a lot to share. So Senate Bill 1276, I mentioned at the beginning, its effective date was June 18th. So that was the date that the governor signed the bill. I'm not going to get into the weeds of that, but some legislation, depending on how many people pass, what the margins it passed by in the House and Senate, can take effect immediately upon signature by the governor. The implementation is this school year, but I will tell you, based on our conversations and the actions that took place at the last SBEC meeting, what we expect to take place on October 1st at the next SBEC meeting, it is not going to be implemented for another year. All rulemaking has been assigned to SBEC. In fact, the bill has removed some rulemaking authority regarding continuing education from the commissioner and the local school districts. The clearinghouse is to be set up in June 2022, and district policies regarding continuing education are to be adopted in August 2022. So you see, it's a long way out. What does it do? It modifies continuing education and professional development for all educators. The reason I say that this was a challenging piece of legislation is because the point of this bill was to undo much of the good work that was implemented in House Bill 18 last session. But there were a bunch of educators, not school counselors, not counseling personnel, but the classroom teachers, the principals, the superintendents. They were very, very upset about the imposition of training on working with special populations, working in grief and trauma, working on identifying mental health issues in students. Very concerned that was very far outside of their scope of work. And so there was a stakeholder group that was organized, TCA, Shannon Noble, Shannon's our lobbyist. She and I worked very, very hard to try to find this stakeholder group and get appointed to it because Senator Lucio's office told us about it and we never could get in there. And so as a result, this legislation really does not reflect the best interests of students or school counselors. So what they did was they just lumped you in with everybody, and they took, they limited for everyone that no more than 25% of your training. Now remember, you have 5 years to accumulate all of your CE hours, can be on, and if you look at this list, this is your job, right? So we've tried to work to amend it. We almost got it amended. The end of the session was the most poorly managed daycare center you've ever seen. They were fighting, they were talking to each other, they were playing games with each other, and we got caught up in that brouhaha on this bill. And so the amendment that we hoped to get on there in the twilight of the session, the wrong amendment was adopted. And so we are working with SBEC. This won't take effect immediately. You should not make any changes. TCA is recommending you make no changes in your continuing education plans The State Board for Education, the TA staff that supports them has advised that they're working on a strategy that even though your continuing education requirements might change, your requirements for renewal are likely to stay the same. So we're working on it, and we'll have more to tell you about that after the October 1st SBEC meeting. So stay tuned and be on the lookout for updates from TCA. It removes rules that mandate TEA or districts create schedules or frequencies of training. So they've completely taken all of that away from TEA, all the way away from the school districts, and given everything to the State Board for Educator Certification, directing them to establish a clearinghouse to recommend best practices for training across all educator certifications and the frequency. The Clearinghouse Advisory Group is supposed to include classroom teachers and educator organizations, and so we are also working hard to be included on that advisory group. Senate Bill 168 is active shooter drills. This is another really good piece of legislation. Rulemaking is assigned to the Texas School Safety Center, to the Texas Fire Marshal, and the commissioner has the option of adopting rules, which means he probably will not. So basically, the first bullet here I think is really important because it requires the School Safety Center, rather than simply develop and share with districts procedures to evacuate, they're going to give them best practices for the shooter drills and exercises. That's very important. The content for those drills and exercises, it must be age appropriate. It must be developed by a team, including campus-based mental health professionals, administrators, teachers, and law enforcement officers. I put in red campus-based mental health professionals because I certainly hope that is how you are considering yourselves as school counselors, because oftentimes you are the only ones that have any exposure to mental health training and services. So if I know you have more than you can say grace over, but if you have the opportunity to be put on that team, please take advantage of it. Parents, students, staff, and the first responders in the area in which the drill is going to take place, they have to be given plenty of adequate notice before the drill starts. The notice must include date, time, content, form, tone, and if the drill will include simulation of a live student. And it also requires that safety zones be established. So if you know someone is going to be overly traumatized, really it should be traumatized at all, but overly traumatized, they should be allowed to go to that safe zone prior to the implementation of the drill. Bullying prevention continues to be a very hot topic in the session. Senate Bill 2050, the effective date was September 1st. It's supposed to be implemented this year. The commissioner has rulemaking authority regarding monitoring of district policy standards and giving guidance on district policy standards, and then also for the PEIMS reporting. To be honest with you, when I look at some of the bullying prevention or bullying issue bills that are enacted each session, I'm always just a little bit surprised because I really believe you are already doing this because, we had David's Law that passed several sessions ago. So I think much of this is in place. But I'm guessing that in some of maybe our smaller districts, perhaps not. But it requires TEA to adopt minimum standards for district policies. So this is different in that it will hopefully create some consistency on bullying prevention with an emphasis on creating school climate, accepting school climate, and positive relationships. It requires the school district to provide instruction at every single grade level on building relationships and preventing bullying, including cyberbullying. So that instruction really is likely part of your classroom guidance when you go into the classrooms. Collect surveys, student surveys. This is a district responsibility, not yours, but those student surveys could give you some really good information on what you should be covering in your classroom guidance on bullying. It requires that a district report bullying and cyberbullying incidents through PEIMS. So this is the state saying we're really serious about this and you got to tell us what's going on. And it also requires that the district have a system for the anonymous reporting of bullying or cyberbullying. House Bill 1525 is the Supplemental Education Funding Bill. This is a massive bill. I think it has like 20 different sections in it. I mentioned earlier how sometimes bills that have been in process hitch a ride on another bill, and the parlance for us who do legislative advocacy call that a Christmas tree bill. And House Bill 1525 to some extent became like a Christmas tree bill. So while it overall took effect on September 1st, 2021, the effective date is different and the implementation is different by section and the rulemaking is different by section. We're working on a more detailed analysis of this bill and hope to have that up soon. In essence, what this bill does, oh, I went way too fast, but that's okay. As I mentioned, it allows the school, I didn't mention this before, this is important. We tried so hard to get this enacted last session, that the school safety allotment could be used for mental health support, culturally relevant instruction, and restorative justice practices and programs. Very important. It allows comp ed funds to be spent on social emotional learning programs. Again, very important. And this, highlighted in red, 1525 was sponsored by Representative Huberty, former chairman of the Public Education Committee, who last session made a commitment that he would never forget school counselors, and he didn't. He helped us tremendously in the 2019 session, and again, here's evidence of his ongoing commitment. If you're working on a resource campus, resource campuses can have no more than, the ratio has to be 1 to 300. It requires them to hire at least one mental health professional and to implement positive behavior programs. It requires TEA to provide technical assistance to schools to ensure internet access to students. And again, what I mentioned earlier was prohibiting the supplanting of state funds with federal dollars. This is a very, very important piece of legislation. And I want to jump back to 179 real quick because I always forget to mention this, and quite frankly, it's one of the most important pieces of Senate Bill 179. The governor signed it. When a bill goes through the process, the governor can veto it. If he opposes it, he can do nothing, and it will take effect on the effective date of that is included in the legislation, or he can sign it. And when the governor signs a bill, it means he has endorsed it. So that is a good argument for you to keep in your hip pocket should you get much pushback from your principal or your district superintendent regarding the requirements for 179. It means the governor signed it. He thinks it's important. It's what he wants you to be doing. So just a little heads up there. All right. Senate Bill 1697. My guess is that you have probably experienced this already because these changes are likely to have already taken place. The effective date was June 16th. Implementation is this year. Commissioner rules were permissive. They're not required. He hasn't done anything. He's likely not to. This is really a COVID bill. It allows parents and guardians to have students request that their students repeat K through 8 or repeat high school courses. The parents have to submit that request in writing. The district can request that a retention committee be appointed. If a parent declines the request to meet to have that meeting, then their request for the student to repeat either the grade or the course is denied. If a student passed the original course, that grade will be retained on the student record in addition to the grade that they get on the new course, unless the district adopts a policy that says that the new grade can replace the old grade. Does not apply to any student who has already met the graduation plans. It only is for coursework and classes taken last academic year, and it doesn't appear to continue after the school year, but it's something that you need to be aware of. So more bills. This is a sort of a laundry list of legislation that I think you should also be aware of. I mentioned earlier Senate Bill 123 that incorporates social emotional learning into character education tweaks. House Bill 750, this is not a bill about your work. This is a bill about your job. And it requires districts to post employment policies on their website. I would check with your district. And Review your employment policies. Know what the rules are for your work. Senate Bill 279 requires that very specific language on suicide prevention be on student identification cards grades 6 through high school. Also requires it for higher education, for students in institutions of higher education. It is effective immediately, and most school districts are, it's not really your problem, but you should have that information, and hopefully you have it posted in your offices as well. But many districts are creating stickers, and I would dare say that next year, the companies that create your student ID cards are going to have it built into the back of it as well. Senate Bill 369, this is another one for you to pay attention to. It modifies the rules and the design of district financial aid opt-out applications. So you want to take a look at those. What's important is it limits what information you have to provide on students who opt out. In other words, you don't have to say why they opted out. You're not required to disclose that information. You can simply assert that you met with the student and their parents and guardians and they've opted out, and that's that. Senate Bill 1095, again, this is another bill that I think covers a lot of what you already do. If you don't, you need to figure out a system in which you can provide notice to parents of students in high school of career technology programs, internships, apprenticeships, externships, and subsidies for AP and IBE exams. My guess is that you're already doing much of that, but there is really, we are shifting, we are continuing the shift back to a strong focus on career and technical focus in our educational programs, and this Senate Bill 1095 is a reflection of that. House Bill 2519, I include this. This is an important bill. This is the bill that we submitted some comment to the TEA staff on the proposed rules, which will be considered at the October 1st SBEC board meeting. I keep this up here. It changes modifies the educator sanctioning notices in an effort to make them, to put more responsibility on SBEC and the TEA staff to let you know if someone has filed a complaint or if there's a sanction pending against you. SBEC can no longer take disciplinary action for resignations that take place 30 days before the first day of school. We attend the SBEC meetings. I'm going to implore you right now, when you hang up, when you finish this program, I know you got to go off and do a million trillion things. Take a second, go onto SBEC, check your profile, and make sure that all of your content information is 100% current, that they have the right school district, that they have your personal email, that they have your zip code is correct. Because I cannot tell you how many educators have had really horrible sanctions imposed on them simply because they didn't get the notice, and the staff will come up and say, we sent it to the address that was on file. There was one woman who didn't get the notice. She'd been communicating with them through email, and then they switched over to having to send it to snail mail. She missed the notice because she had one digit off on her zip code. Now, SBEC took pity on her, but that was highly unusual. So please, please make sure your information is correct. House Bill 3379, it changes the word suspects as the justification to report child abuse to reasonable cause to believe. This was a piece of legislation that was the result of one legislator's constituent ending up in having to deal with CPS because someone suspected child abuse, and they asserted there was no reasonable cause for it. This legislation does not include definition for reasonable cause. That's one of the reasons we opposed it, but we are advising you just keep doing what you're doing. If you suspect child abuse, then you need to report it. And remember, you need to follow first and foremost the requirements of the Health and Safety Code, and then the requirements of your district. If your district tells you you report it to your principal before you report it to the authorities, I would challenge that policy. House Bill 1590, for those of you who are doing supervision, this simply, again, this is a COVID bill. It modifies field-based observations to allow for 2 in person and 2 virtual, or 3 in person. And then sadly, Senate Bill 860 will delay implementation of the electronic TASFA for another year. It won't be in place until 2023, 2024. I'm going to keep going because I don't have a lot of time, and I definitely want to talk to you about building support for your programs. When I've presented this before, I usually do it in a joint presentation with Lisa Pritchard, who's so much more effective at this because Lisa Pritchard has converted the school counseling programs in Humble ISD so effectively that when her superintendent moved to Bernie ISD, he took her with him, and she has completely turned things around over at Bernie ISD as well. So she's really the expert on building support for your programs. If you need, I also want to, as I'm saying this, I want to let you know, if you're struggling with this, you can reach out to TCA, you can reach out to TASCA. They've got a VP of elementary, middle, and high school. We can get you connected to help you build your confidence there. So the most important thing here is that data drives decisions. So when you are beginning to look at what kind of information you want, you need to begin with the end in mind. What action do you want to take place? What change in behavior do you want to see? What change in allocation of duties do you want to see? So be thinking about what it is that you want to accomplish and how that data will tell your story. And again, another plug, September 21st, TASC is going to help you with that. But collecting the data that will tell your story. I know data collection can be massive and overwhelming and really daunting for people, but it is what drives the decisions that are going to be made at your district and campus level. So do time studies, count the number of students. How do you spend your time? You don't have to do it every single day. You can do it over a period of time, but determine what that time period is. Count the number of students that you have coming into the counseling office to see counselors. Count not only the number of guidance lessons that you deliver, but how many students did you touch every time you went into a classroom, right? So it's not just, well, you know, in this semester, in this quarter, I went and did 4 guidance lessons at, or 6 if you're in an elementary school, because I went into each classroom, each grade level 6 times. How many kids did you touch? Talk about that. Don't just count the number of groups you have, count the number of group sessions that you have held, and count the number of kids that are in those group sessions, and track the outcome, right? How many kids were you able to help who are struggling with grief? How many kids were you able to help in those group sessions who then were able to move on and stop coming to the group because they had good tools in their toolbox? Count the number of office referrals, and then before and after. Track attendance rates for the students that you're reaching. Count the number of self-harm outcries. Track your disciplinary data. Take a look at what is happening, what happened last year in disciplinary, how many referrals, and then what does it look like this year after you've implemented your program. And talk about the subpopulations that you work with as well. Tips for effective advocacy. The best defense is a good offense. Know what your opponents are concerned about. So for example, when we were testifying on this bill, on Senate Bill 179, we already knew what the opponents were talking about because one of the legislators sent us the email blast that had been sent by some of our opponents to all of the House members when the Friday before Senate Bill 179 was going to be voted on in the House. That allowed us to be able to create opposition to it, to actually come out and say, you know, people are concerned that this is going to create a double standard for the people who work on your campus. That is not correct. This is what it does. And we were able to counter their arguments. The best defense is always a good offense, but you have to be gracious and patient and kind when you do that. Anger gets us nowhere. even when people are rude to us, like those people, quite frankly, were very rude to me when I reached out to them and said, I think you misread the bill. But I didn't care. I don't care. You can be as rude to me as you want to be. I'm going to still be that calm, passionate voice for school counselors because I know what you do to support students. Be a patient broken record. Obviously, I am one since I've been advocating on this issue since 2005. And tell the story. It's so important for you to share your successes, share the benefit of the work that you do, and grow your people. How do you grow your people? By presenting what it is that you do to support the work of the classroom teachers and to support the work of your APs by delivering comprehensive school counseling programs. Every meeting you go to, be prepared to share a story. Be passionate. And then, of course, getting involved in TASCA is really effective because I got to tell you, your TASCA leadership is over there arguing and fighting for you at every level, and they will keep you informed and give you tools and resources. So spreading the word is one of the most important strategies in an effective advocacy program. As I mentioned earlier, when I talked about the State Board of Education, invite elected officials to your campus events. Are you having a career day? Are you doing a college, if you're having a career day? Are you having a college day? Are you having college signing day? Are you having a FAFSA program? Invite your state senator, your state representative, your State Board of Education person. If your local school board, your district school board district members, invite them to the campus, invite them to your program, invite them to see what it is that you do. If your state rep and your state senator said they can't come, ask for their staff to come and represent them, because the staff is even actually more important and more influential than the legislators themselves. Make sure that you are doing a presentation to the PTA and to other local organizations like the Rotary Club and so forth. Many, many, many times the PTA can be the voice for you and can say things to the principal and can say things to the school board that maybe it's not politically appropriate or safe for you to express. But when you present to the PTA the program that you have for your students, you have built automatically advocates. And I say that as a mom who was very active in our PTA when my son was going through school. I was able to say things to the principal and be an advocate for school counselors that my school counselors couldn't. And many parents, as you know, so many people, like, unless they have a kid who's challenging or in trouble, or unless you've had some serious incidents on your campus, most parents don't really have any clue about what you do. They don't know the difference between you and a social worker and a licensed specialist in school psychology, you know. Also, submit op-ed pieces. You could do that if testing is taking place on strategies on how to keep calm, if trauma has taken place, how to work with kiddos. This is Suicide Prevention Month. There are a ton of resources that you could share. Respond to news stories, write articles on key issues, and then promote your work on social media. So the thing here is, when you want a seat at the table, you need to pull up a chair. You know, I'm going to close with a small anecdote. I used to work for the Higher Education Coordinating Board, and I did public policy and government relations. And our conference rooms were, you know, the fish bowls. And I walked past one and I saw these people in there that I've been working with on a project, and I wasn't in there. And I was kind of pouting. I was much younger. I don't pout very much anymore. Much younger, and I was pouting. And towards the end of the day, the commissioner came by and we were just chatting. And he said, "Well, you seem really upset. What's going on?" And I said, "Well, there was a meeting, and based on the people who were in that room, I think you were talking about this topic, and I should have been in there." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, then if you should have been in there, Jan, you should have opened the door and pulled up a chair." And what he said was, it's highly unlikely that people are going to tell you to leave the room, especially with the resources that you as school counselors bring to the table. So I want to encourage you to find your courage, pull up a chair, because you know what? You got this. I'm going to stop now with a couple of minutes. I'm going to stop my share and go back on the screen. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have. I'm happy to share this PowerPoint. I'll get it over to your hosts and they can share it with you if you'd like. And I'm always available. You can call me, you can actually, you know, because our phone system, because of COVID, it's a little wonky, send me an email. My email is jan@txca.org. And I'm seeing a bunch of people I know. Hi, Jamie Farber. I saw a couple of names of other people I know. Thanks so much for taking time to be with me today. And let me know if you have any questions. I'm available.
So Jan, we have a question in the chat. Thank you so much. That was amazing, as usual. So we have a question in the chat. Can you expand on the implementation of House Bill 3979 and the new personal finance economics course? Does it start in 22 or 23?
3979. You know what? Can you, I don't have a pen with me. Can you
Please.
send me an email with that, and I will
Definitely.
take a look at that bill and get some feedback. Get some feedback to you that you can share with the group. I don't have it
Definitely.
right in front. Thousands of bills. I can't remember all of them.
And yeah, thank you for that. And guys, we are going to send the information out in an email along with the recording and the PowerPoint. So you'll have access to it and we'll share out. Let's see if there are any more questions in the chat. Are districts of innovation exempt from Senate Bill 179?
Ooh, that is another excellent question. I am going to say, I think that they are not, but you know, those districts of innovation operate under a whole other set of rules, and they are exempt from a lot of those requirements. Could you send that to me as well? And
Definitely.
I'll check on that. These are great questions. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I just really want to tell you again, you know, I'm not a professional counselor. I'm not a school counselor. I've been doing this for a really long time. And I am so in awe of the work that you do and how hard you work and how tirelessly you work. And I'm really honored that so many of you, I'm looking at seeing there are like almost 40 people in here today. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm honored that you would give me this time with you today. And as I said, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have a question, if you have a challenge, if you need a strategy, if you need someone else to also support you and back you up. TCA and TASCA are here for you. And then once again, a big plug, September 21st for the TASCA Lunch and Learn, an hour of your time, an hour well spent.
Thank you again, Jan. And the for the Lunch and Learn, Valerie dropped that registration link in the chat, so take advantage of that. Again, thank you, Jan, for the wonderful presentation of information today. Thanks to everyone else for attending today. I know that you got something very valuable out of this. So kudos to you guys for taking time away out of your day to participate. It's amazing to see all of your wonderful faces here. So thanks again. I won't belabor. I know it's 10 o'clock. We will send this information out to you guys as soon as possible, along with the information that Jan sends us back in response to your questions. So thanks again.
And just one thing, check your SBEC contact information right away.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take good care.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Have a good day. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks, Jan.